sports note for Saturday, June the 22nd, and the NBA season is officially over. The Boston Celtics claimed their record breaking 18th NBA championship back on Monday night in dominating fashion in a 5 game win over the Dallas Mavericks. Now, this was the Celtics team that everyone thought was going to show up really last year or even the year before. Boston was 64 and 18 in the regular season, finished well ahead of the Knicks. They finished 14 games ahead of the Knicks, to be honest, and it was the largest lead of any number one overall seed since Michael Jordan's Chicago Bulls finished 16 up on the Celtics at the close of the 91-92 campaign, and that was Jordan's second championship. It was the middle part of the first three-peat. Now, Boston ran essentially roughshod through the playoffs. They only needed 5 to take down Miami in the opening round. They needed 5 against Cleveland, swept Indiana, and then only needed 5 against the Mavericks, whereas Michael's team, as great as that team was, they needed 7 in the first round. They needed 7 games in the second round against the Knicks, and then they needed 6 in both the Eastern Conference Finals against Cleveland, and then also 6 in the NBA Finals against Portland. Boston's 16-3 mark in the playoffs is second only to the Golden State Warriors' 16-1 mark in the 2017 playoffs. Now, that was the year after the Warriors had blown the 3-1 lead to Cleveland, becoming the first ever team to do so. That certainly was not going to be the case with Boston, as loaded as Boston was, and as great of a season as the Celtics had. Now, there were a lot of people that kind of thought Boston went out, took care of business in Game 1 against Miami, got blown out in Game 2, and everyone's starting to think, could Miami actually have the blueprint on somebody else to beat Boston, when they get through? Could it be Cleveland? Could it be Indiana? Could it be the Knicks? Whomever. That obviously was not the case, because Boston went out, took care of business. The final 3 games of that series, won Game 1 in dominating fashion, much like Game 1 against Miami. Against Cleveland, got stomped in Game 2, and then Cleveland was missing 2 of their big 4 really for the rest of the series. Donovan Mitchell didn't play much. Jared Allen didn't play in the series at all. Darius Garland missed Game 4 or Game 5, one of the two. And Boston seemed to struggle with a much depleted Cleveland team, but yet still took care of business. None of those games were really in doubt. Once they got into the fourth quarter, Boston was absolutely going to actually handle home court at that particular point and close out Cleveland. They did. They did not run Indiana off the floor in the sweep, but they certainly seemed to kind of do whatever they wanted to against Dallas. Now, this is not taking anything away from Dallas. Dallas beat a Minnesota team that a lot of people thought was going to be about the only team in the playoffs to be able to give Boston any kind of series, and they ran them right off the floor. Dominated in Game 1 after being down early. We're down by 22 in Game 2, came back and won handily. Dominated in Game 3, got run off the floor by 34 points in Game 4, and that's actually when head coach Joe Mazzulla basically pulled all of his starters essentially at halftime, and then just let the bleeding go and get the Celtics back to the teeny North Garden, handle business they did, because they were already up big at halftime. The fourth quarter was essentially a victory lap, and it actually led to the Celtics hosting the Larry O'Brien Trophy for the record 18th time, and also a parade Friday through the streets of Boston. Now, the Celtics, this was historic in a multitude of different ways. Number one, it was 2 weeks after the unfortunate passing of Bill Walton. Even though Walton only played the parts of 2 years at the very end of his career with the Celtics, did win a championship. There were a lot of questions as to whether Boston's own potential big man who can affect the outcome of a game, Kristaps Porzingis, was even going to be available to play in this series, or when he would. Porzingis had missed more than a month with a lower leg injury. Suited up for game one, put in 20 points, played, I want to say 26 minutes in game two, put in 12, missed games 3 and 4 with the injury, and then came back for game five. And then it's actually been announced that he is going to need surgery on that injury, but he definitely will be ready in time for training camp in the fall. You can't talk about Boston without actually talking about their dynamic duo of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And then you also can throw Drew Holiday into that mix. There are so many different pieces of Boston that there was, once these playoffs really got rolling, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that the Celtics were going to be the team to beat in the East. It would just all be a matter of who would be their matchup in the West. Now, had they matched up with Minnesota, maybe the series would have gone 5, 6, 7. You never know. Dallas definitely kind of overachieved in being that dominant against Minnesota the way that they were in the sweep. And then, and by the time that showed, they met just over 2 weeks ago in Game One. You could absolutely tell that this was going to be a very long series if you're a Dallas Mavericks fan. The fact that Jaylen Brown, however, this is the only thing I take umbrage with, the fact that Jaylen Brown took home the Bill Russell Award as Finals MVP when Jason Tatum's numbers were better. Brown averaged 20.8 points, 5.4 rebounds, and 5 assists, and played around 30.5 minutes per game. Tatum had more points at 22.2. He had more rebounds at 7.8. He had more assists, and he played nearly 10 more minutes per game. And then Tatum finished third in all playoff scoring with 475 points. He was third in assists with 119. He was second in rebounds at 184, and he finished fourth in total minutes played with 768. The number one player for most of those, however, was Dallas's Luka Doncic. If this was something that this series would have gone 6, possibly even 7, you could have potentially seen Doncic become only the second player since Jerry West, who we talked about last week, win the Finals MVP on a losing team. Now, Luka definitely was about the only Maverick player who showed up and showed out the entire series. Kyrie Irving was mostly a non-factor, showed up for maybe 2 games at most, and certainly not at the most opportune times. But this was a scenario of just how dominant was Boston. They lost Game 3 against Miami by 10, Game 2 against Cleveland by 24, Game 4 against Dallas by 38. That's how good that Dallas was in that Game 4. But it's also a matter of, was Boston looking for the sweep, or did Boston know that, hey, we can do whatever we want here, unlike what's going on in the NHL, which I'm certainly going to be talking about here Monday at some point in the Sports Note. So stay tuned for that. But Boston, you had to know that, yeah, they could have the one-off game. They had already gone on they went on after the loss to Cleveland, they went on a nice little 10-game winning streak. And there was no way that they were going to lose, 4 straight at that particular point, or even 3 straight after Dallas got Game 4. Bring it back home to Boston, get out early, which they did. They dominated completely through. And with the win, it also means that Joe Mazzulla makes quite a bit of history himself. Now, Mazzulla turns 36 next weekend. He will officially turn 36 on the 30th, so 1 week from tomorrow night. At the time I'm taping this, Mazzulla is the second youngest head coach ever to win the finals. Number one was Bill Russell, who was 35 when he guided the Celtics to a championship in 1969. Bill Russell was born in February. Joe Mazzulla was born at the end of June. Mazzulla also becomes the second consecutive Boston coach to win a championship and have it be their first title. The most recent was that 2008 championship, where Doc Rivers guided the Big Three, which was Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce. And to date, as good as Doc Rivers is as a coach and all the great talent that he's had lined up, that was still Doc Rivers' only championship of his head coaching career. It's the time between the 1986 Celtics and that '08 championship team is the longest gap in the history of the Boston Celtics franchise between titles. The one that they had between '08 and Monday night was the second longest, and all signs point to Boston's going to bring most of this team back. They don't have very many free agents that are going to really affect the cohesiveness of that unit. And looking at free agency, which opens up later on the middle of next week with the negotiating period, there's a lot of big names out there, but there are a lot of big names at the back end of their career who might only have maybe a couple of years left in them, like a Spencer Dinwiddie, a Paul George, a James Harden, a LeBron James. All guys really 35 and up are the big names out there. But when you've got Tatum and Brown and Drew Holiday's in that mix, and then they actually found a way to win without Porzingis for a big chunk of these playoffs, it's definitely something that Boston's primed to possibly repeat or make another deep run next year. And more importantly, if you're a Celtics fan, not only do you get championship number 18 and put yourself past the Lakers, but with the Lakers hiring J.J. Redick out of the broadcast booth on ESPN, Joe Mazzulla is essentially set up now. Mazzulla is a coach of the year. He's got a career regular season record of 121 and 43, and that's the highest in league history for any coach who's been behind the bench for at least 150 games. He's also 27 and 12 in the playoffs, and that's a 692 clip. With the talent that Boston has and the fact that that core's not going anywhere, Mazzulla's going to find himself as early as next year, not maybe next year, but the year after, find himself getting to 50 wins, and that actually you'd start to see his name on the list of all-time greats, because I want to say Steve Kerr's got the highest winning percentage of any playoff coach with at least 50 victories in the playoffs, even more than Red Auerbach. Even more than Phil Jackson's got the all-time record, and I don't know if anybody's going to catch that. With the fact that he's also got 11 championships, which means you've got 11 times 15 or 16 wins when the NBA expanded to best of 7 in all 4 rounds. So let me know what you guys think. Where does this Celtics team rank amongst their all-time teams? Is it a top 3? Is it a top 5? Are they the favorites next year? Where do you think the J.J. Redick hiring is going to be? Was Jason Tatum essentially kind of robbed of the MVP award, and why? Mike and I will be with you on the Wise Guys tonight. We're going to have a special guest, and I will see you guys. You're going to see a lot of me here very soon. I've got another idea in the can that's going to get written and recorded for tomorrow, and then we will certainly be doing something on Tuesday or Wednesday after the conclusion of the Stanley Cup Finals. We're going to be talking about either the greatest comeback in the history of sports, and on the backside of that, the greatest choke in the history of team sport. Or we're going to talk about how Florida nearly let it slip away and got their elusive first cup. So I will talk to you guys very, very soon. Take care.